few quotes, which certainly for me have been lessons that I've learned from founding and co-chairing the Belfast Climate Commission. The first is that it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. The second is, what if we're the people we've been waiting for? The third is, when you point your finger at someone, there's three pointing back at you. And a more recent one that has certainly come prominent in my mind as a result of the recent pandemic is that it's only when the tide goes out you realize who's naked. So in terms of encouraging communication and coordination and cooperation, it's really important to think about who to invite, and particularly personalities, organizations, and so on. And also about being mindful of not choosing to contact people who think like you. You know, the issue is we need a variety of voices and perspectives. We need to be challenging each other, even as we all share similar desires. We're all, you know, parents, we're all citizens, you know, we all have an interest in a viable future for the places that we live in. But it really is important to encourage, you know, an inclusive, democratic, and sometimes uncomfortable space where we can have very different views about how we see the future. So for me, a lesson from the Belfast Commission is to encourage disagreement and dissent, and respectfully engaging and appreciating different views. I think there's also another issue which is often very hard to formulate. It's partly to do with personality and the people initiating any particular drive towards decarbonisation or climate resilience. And that is the importance of honesty, to say that, listen, here's the best available science that we have. Let's use this as the basis upon which we can make decisions. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, where we found a particularly useful evidence base to begin these conversations. But also to honestly appreciate, and this is a delicate issue, that the question we're facing now involves emotions. It involves the future, maybe desires we have for our children or our grandchildren. And we shouldn't shy away from acknowledging the importance of emotion, of grief, because for many people they experience the climate issue as one of grief. And many of you might be familiar with the Kubler-Ross grieving cycle, where you go through disbelief, anger, depression, and so on. And that's a difficult issue because it really brings home that the climate crisis and the planetary emergency is unprecedented in terms of bringing in these emotional as well as scientific and social scientific issues. Just more logistically.
John, do you mind if I just interrupt for 1 second? The things that you're describing about the getting people together on the commission, could you just backtrack a little bit and just say what the commission actually is and what the function of it is?
Yes, the Belfast Climate Commission is following in the trailblazing footsteps of the Leeds Climate Commission, which was set up in 2017. It's essentially a high-level organisation in Belfast, as it is in Leeds. There's also one in Edinburgh, and there's other ones setting up across the UK and Ireland. It's to bring together anchor institutions. So essentially in Belfast, it's between the university where I work and the City Council, but also involves bringing in businesses, faith communities, environmental groups. We have, you know, people from Youth Strike for Climate, Extinction Rebellion, Friends of the Earth, right up to Arup, one of the world's biggest and leading engineering companies. And so it's essentially there to provide the evidence base and to outline the decarbonisation and climate resilient pathways for the city, for others though to implement. So it's not an implementation body. That's for central government or city council or, you know, the NHS here in Belfast if there's a particular topic around that. So it's largely around trying to provide a direction, an evidence base, a safe space for discussing, you know, sometimes quite radical perspectives on how we address the planetary emergency.
Thank you very much, John. And now I'm going to be rude and say you've only got 1 minute left, having asked you to say something extra.
No, so for me, the two things that I found that has really helped with communication and coordination is a shared scientific evidence base. So we have commissioned, and we're just about to formally launch, a pathways to decarbonisation for Belfast. You know, how can Belfast aim towards the UK, you know, strategy of net zero by 2050? And that's been useful, so everybody can agree to that, and that's the context in which we're discussing. That would then lead to the second issue, which is that, and again, I speak not just as a lapsed, but completely collapsed Catholic, but I do believe that the Bible and faith traditions have a lot to teach us. And in the Bible, we learn, without vision, the people perish. So we need a shared vision. So we're hoping, and we're in the early stages, the Belfast Commission was only launched in January, that the shared scientific basis that the decarbonisation pathways report has given us will help bring us to a point where we as a commission can have a broadly agreed shared vision for what does Belfast look like in 2050 when we reach net zero. And that's going to be a difficult process because we have people from different perspectives and so on. But we hope that in the process of meeting, and we meet quite a bit, that we build up relationships of trust and communication. And ultimately, just to finish, I no longer see myself as an academic in this process. I'm a father, I'm a citizen, I'm a public servant, and therefore I'm working with other colleagues in the public sector to help us deal with this most unprecedented challenge. And here ended the secular sermon.
Thank you. So my name is Henrik, and I'm working as an environmental coordinator for the city of Växjö in southern Sweden. Växjö has, in the whole municipality, about 95,000 inhabitants, and of which about 65,000 is in the city. I'm working in a sustainability unit, mostly with climate-related issues. And 25 years ago, our politicians decided unanimously that Växjö is going to be a fossil fuel-free city, meaning a city where we no longer emit any CO2 from fossil fuels by 2030. And we didn't really know how to get there or what to do, but we for sure really knew that we can't solve this by our own. It's not possible for only the city organization, the municipal organization to solve this. So therefore, cooperation with various stakeholders, citizens, organizations, companies is very crucial for the possibilities for our goal to be achieved. And also last year we adopted a new sustainability program, and there we even broadened the goal and said by 2030 the citizens of Växjö should no longer need to have any negative climate impact, which means that could actually be on the way they live, the lifestyle patterns, the consumption patterns, everything. So we have a very tough target to achieve. We have come far. We have a total fossil fuel-free energy production, but we still have a lot of emissions from transport sector, and there we have lots of passenger cars, of course. So we need help from the citizens there. And how do we do this? Well, we ran several campaigns to involve citizens, to make them participate. We see that many more now on want to participate somehow, but they don't really know how to do that. So they want our guidance from the city. So what can they do? So I will elaborate a bit on that. The last years we also had, when we adopted this program, sustainability program, it was very crucial for us to ask people what do they think, what do they want from a sustainable future. So we had dialogues with 1,500 persons in various ages and various geographical parts of the city and various organizations to attract a wide range of opinions and ideas. And now we are starting to get back to all these groups and people to give them feedback on what kind of result we had and how we can work on this together. What can they do? What can we do? What kind of support do they need for us? And how can we plan the city so it will be easy for them to live a climate-friendly life? And I can also share some ideas about some interesting campaigns we did during the last years.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you, Henrik. So if you'd like to hear more about some of the campaigns and the other sort of communication methods and so on that's been going on in Sweden, which might be helpful for Lancaster as well, then Henrik will be in the group with John Barry on corporation communication, which is Group A. Right, so the next one we're going on to is pension funds, which is going to be B. If you're looking for what you might need to name yourself, you'd be interested in that. So I'm going to ask Lizzie Collins to speak first from Lancashire County Council Pension Fund Committee, and then we'll have Ben Lennon, who's a Divest Invest campaigner. So Lizzie, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I'm Lizzie Collins. I'm a county councillor in Lancaster and I sit on Lancashire Pension Fund Committee. I'm also recently appointed as a shadow cabinet member for climate change and the environment with the Labour group. So I'm actually really looking forward to the outcome of the People's Jury because I'm hoping that will be able to influence our policy making. So Lancashire County Council Pension Fund has £8.4 billion of assets. It's a big fund. There's 400 employers who are part of that fund, and we've got a total membership of 176,000 people. So there's a lot of money there. So in terms of the Pension Fund Committee, we are responsible for good governance of the fund, and we're made up of county councillors, representatives from city and borough councils, representatives of trade unions and of higher education authorities, and we have a lot of expert officers who advise us. We decide on things like asset allocation. That basically means roughly how much of our money will we spend on different things. That's very high level. So it's infrastructure projects, real estate, global and private equities, which is basically investing in the stock market. So we're responsible for making sure that fund is governed properly. We also create and decide on policies which include responsible investment policies. Now, as a pension committee fund member, my primary responsibility is to make money for the members. Our primary responsibility is to pay pensions, and that's known as a fiduciary duty. And it's something that comes up quite a lot when you're talking about responsible investment and climate change. Now, our pension fund is actually pooled in with the London Local Government Pension Fund. And so it's not invested directly by us. It's actually in a pooled fund that's managed by a company called the Local Pensions Partnerships Investments Limited. So back in 2018, before I was on the committee, there was a working group set up to look at responsible investment, which includes climate change, but is by no means limited to climate change and fossil fuels. But I'm going to focus on that today. There was a lot of discussion, from what I hear, about what should and shouldn't be done as part of that responsible investment strategy, but that now is in place. I'll talk about that in a second. But climate change is recognised as a serious risk, not only obviously to us and the planet, but in financial terms, it is a risk to the health of the fund, because essentially companies that don't decarbonise are not a good investment for us. And actually, if you're having to deal with the impact, the economic impact of climate change, is massive. So we do measure our responsible investment, and when it comes to climate change, or fossil fuels, because obviously climate change is a lot wider than fossil fuels, but when it comes to fossil fuels, 4.5% of our assets are invested directly in what are classified as green investments. Now, that's mostly renewable energy making. It is very difficult to measure the carbon impact of investments and the responsibility aspects of investments, so it's a bit rough and ready. And then there's what we call brown investments, which are currently 3.8% of our investments, and they're directly involved with extracting, transporting, refining, supplying or using fossil fuels to generate energy.
Lizzie, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. 1 minute left.
Thank you. So there's two approaches to decarbonising pension funds, and I think this is what we need to discuss in the smaller groups. There's divestment, which I think Ben's going to talk about, so I'll leave that for him. And there's using shareholder power to make change happen. Now, this is the approach that currently there's a lot of debate around, and currently the approach that the Lancashire Pension Fund through the investment company takes. So essentially, we don't divest everything away from fossil fuel companies. What the investment company does and what the policy is to actively work with companies who emit carbon, particularly around the use of fossil fuels, to stop doing it and to be part of the transition to a low carbon economy. Now, there's very good arguments in favour of divestment, and I'd say I don't know the answer to this. I genuinely am torn on this. But there are also very good arguments for using the money in pension funds to decarbonise those companies and to use the shareholder power, so the power of having money in those companies, to make them better companies. So I'm going to stop there because I think my 5 minutes is up.
Sorry, I was just I was just unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Lizzie. I appreciate that for all these topics. It's really hard to say what you need to say in 5 minutes, but hopefully that's given people a bit of an overview and enough of a flavour, alongside Ben, who I'm going to come to next, to decide if you're going to be putting a B in front of your name as one of the two groups that you want to talk to and have a chance to talk more to. So Ben, I understand that you've been briefed to give us a bit of a back to basic start in terms of what's the importance of pension funds in all of this, as well as to go on to talk a bit about what you're working on. So over to you for 5 minutes.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to try and keep this really top line, just really easy to understand for everyone. Basically, a pension fund is a type of retirement plan where a worker and an employer together add a little bit of money every month into an account for when you retire. This money is invested in companies, so the amount of money will grow over time, and there'll be more money for you when you finish your job. You know, as you mentioned, they only invest in things that will make a big profit, so they can't invest in parks or hospitals. And then the worker can't access this money until they retire. So your pension fund will probably be invested in thousands of companies over your lifetime of work. This could be Google or McDonald's, and technically you own a very, very tiny amount of those companies. And when they make a profit, so do you. So that then leads to what is divestment. Divestment is just another way of saying disinvesting or de-investing, or just even more simply choosing not to invest your pension money in one particular type of company. So in the past, this was really popular with tobacco and military weapons because people thought these were bad for society and they didn't want their money to support them. So they moved their money elsewhere. In our case, because we're talking about climate change, we mean deciding not to invest in companies that produce oil, gas, and other fossil fuels that are causing climate change. It's really important to remember that just 100 companies in the world are responsible for 70% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the best thing about divestment is that you can actually choose to invest the money in other types of companies instead of fossil fuels. You don't need to create more money, it's already there. You just have to move it to give it to other companies like wind or solar. And this could even be in social housing. And then there's also another reason to divest, which was touched on previously, is that climate change means that a lot of these companies won't be around in 30 or 40 years. So if you're a 25-year-old worker, you know, your shares in BP aren't much use to you in 45 years time. Yeah, so I guess we can just look at who can divest. Basically nearly anyone with a pension fund can. That's almost any worker. How each one works is quite different, and depending on your job and what fund your money in, it's all a bit different. But I'm going to try and keep 3 broad examples. So if we look at individuals, or kind of, what can we do in our own homes? This could be you, your friends, or your family. If you have a private pension fund, you can find out who it is with by asking your employer or just checking your own accounts. And you can switch your fund easily to a fund that agrees with, net zero by 2030, not investing in these fossil fuel companies at all. The next option, which would be kind of around the neighbourhood theme maybe, is the local government. Lizzie covered this really well. And I just say that, your local government pension fund hasn't fully divested, and I think they should. They've done some really good investments already, like £12 million have been invested in Westmill Solar Co-op, which is the UK's largest cooperatively owned solar farm, and we'd love to see more of this. And 12 UK local government pension funds have already divested. They still make money. They haven't had any adverse effects. It's more profitable to invest in green technology than it is for fossil fuels for obvious reasons. And you can make Lancashire next. And then the final example that I talk about is institutions. These can be, your religious institution or a university. And so this could kind of be seen as maybe the district level at a bit of a push. So some large institutions not only have pension funds that they invest for their employers when they retire, but they also just invest money generally to make money, say, for paying staff in a university. Lancaster University still invests in fossil fuel companies and takes donations from them, despite some really good efforts by students there to get them to fully change. But now half of the universities in the UK have divested. And again, maybe with some support, you could make Lancaster University next. And then the same can be said of your faith institution. Really impressively, I think, this January, the Catholic Diocese of Lancaster and Middlesbrough announced their commitments to fully divest from fossil fuels, and they became the first Catholic diocese in England and Wales to do so. So I guess the main thing
just under a minute left.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. I guess the main thing I'd say is that, there are examples in your local area of this being done, but we'd just like to see it done on a wider scale and maybe a bit quicker. And I'd really like to talk these through with everyone. Thanks.